Hello everyone, welcome to our Egyptian Online Seminar Group. First, keep hands off. Then, if you have any questions, you can ask our speaker during his presentation or after his presentation. I have great pleasure of welcoming the Professor Ben Lee. Ben Lee is an associate professor of accounting at the Vanderbilt University. His research primarily examines the impact of accounting disclosures on investor behavior and firm value. More recently, his work has focused on the role of emerging technology and ESG factors in shaping the fast evolving landscape of accounting. Professor Lee research has been published in top ranking journals and in leading journals, accounting and business journals, and has received multiple national awards such as the Notable Contribution to Accounting Literature Award and the FARS Best Paper Award. Now we will start our seminar with the Professor Bendy.
Well, thank you very much for the invitation, Mohammed, and thank you for giving me the time to promote my research. This paper is worked with my previous PhD student at University of Houston, Megan Zhang. She is very intelligent and competent, and she's also well trained. And she will be on the job market next year. If your school have hiring plans, I would recommend taking a look at her. This paper, for those of you who know me, I lived in Oklahoma for a couple of years, and this paper you can view it as from my memory of my old days. So it's not a typical accounting paper, but I think it's kind of interesting. It fits my recent research agenda. So from the title of the paper, you can sort of guess that already. This paper is about how policy uncertainty affects firm decisions. So policy uncertainty has been affecting us in the past few decades, let's say at least 50 to 60 years since 1950s. This is a figure from Baker et al. As you can see that there's a huge increase in policy uncertainty in the US and also in terms of how much regulations we're facing nowadays. And you will also see a similar increasing trend in the government's share of GDP. So, but this is not just limited to the U.S. At a lot of in a lot of other countries, we also see political swings or even political turbulences over the years. So I think this question is of interest to a lot of people in a sense. So in most recent years, just before the election, you can also see in the US, we face a lot of political swings and uncertainty, and it now slowly quiets down after the election. So at a very high level, the motivating question of our paper is how firms make decisions under policy uncertainty. But we have a specific focus here, which is about externalities of firm decisions in response to political uncertainty. Oh, by the way, feel free to stop me and ask questions whenever you have. But if you look at the literature, there's also a vast literature on this aspect, right? The impact of policy uncertainty on firm decisions. For example, Baker et al. The famous Baker et al. 2016 paper, Coolen and Iron, Jans, they focus normally on firm investments and production decisions in response to increased policy uncertainty. In this paper, we consider policy uncertainty from a little bit different angle, which is what are the externalities stemming from these firm decisions. In particular, we want to consider environmental consequences as an important dimension of those externalities. So as I said, our objective in this question is to investigate how firms formulate investment and production decisions when facing higher policy uncertainty, particularly when these decisions can introduce some environmental externalities. I lived in Oklahoma for 2 years, and I remember every day when I drive down or up Interstate Highway 35, I can see a lot of oil rigs and also sometimes the flaring in the evening. So I was thinking back then, how does that affect the environment? And, we also know from our life that there are numerous firms whose investment or production processes can create substantial environmental problems. A prominent example is oil and gas production. Of course, we all know that. For example, there's a study called Buonocore et al. 2023, which finds that air pollution from the oil and gas production in 2016 alone in the US caused significant health damage and environmental issues. For example, like respiratory diseases or premature death. So using that one single year of data, they find that oil and gas production causes a lot of air emissions, and the emissions lead to over $77 billion of health damage. So that's a pretty alarming number. In terms of prediction, well, I think it's exactly unclear how our producers will respond to higher policy uncertainty for the following reasons. Well, there are two different camps in the prediction. One is the classic real option theory. You can think about famous papers like Bernanke 83, Pindyck 93. The basic rationale is very intuitive. We face such decisions in our life too, right? So let's say you are going to buy a car and you are not very certain about whether that car will fit you or not, whether the car has good quality or not. Usually what you will do is to wait and see, meaning that you want to delay the decision or use the option to defer. Why do you do that? Well, because it's a costly decision for you. It involves considerable sunk cost, and it is partially irreversible. And for firms, it's the same. When they face a lot of uncertainty, they may choose to wait and see, and they will value their real options to delay a lot more. So, in this sense, we would predict that when policy uncertainty increases, firms will choose to wait and see. So that implies a negative impact of policy uncertainty on firm investment and production. And here, if we assume a positive correlation between firm investment and production with environmental externalities, we would expect that among higher policy uncertainty, firms will choose to decrease their investment and production, which can lead to less pollution. On the other hand, if you look at the right part, there's a famous concept first initiated by Hardin. It's called the tragedy of the commons. So basically, he's saying, well, firms may do something different in the presence of policy uncertainty, because if policy uncertainty increases the firm's instability or uncertainty about losing some future economic benefits, they may choose to accelerate their production and investment so they can reap as much as possible among this uncertainty, right? So basically, political uncertainty or instability can cause a sense of insecurity, and that insecurity will lead to accelerations in firm production and investment. Well, in this sense, we would expect a positive impact of policy uncertainty on firm investment and production. Well, as before, if we assume that there's a positive association between firm investment, production, and externalities, this can lead to more pollution. And in fact, if that's the case, this will fall under Cole's notion of the problem of social cost. Basically, it says, well, firms may not be fully responsible for their pollution or environmental externalities in the society. So they will choose to weigh between the economic benefits and the environmental problems of externalities. And if they're not fully liable for their pollution, they may choose to pollute more and get more economic benefits today. So here, in summary, basically we have two opposite predictions. While the real option theory will suggest a negative impact of policy uncertainty on firm investment and production, leading to less pollution, the other camp, I mean, the tragedy of commons would suggest that there's a positive association between firm investment and production and policy uncertainty, which can lead to more pollution. So two opposite views on this idea. And thus, our prediction, I mean, empirical prediction is binary. Well, to test this idea, I use a setting from my days in Oklahoma, which is the 2020 U.S. Supreme Court ruling in the McGirt versus Oklahoma case. So this ruling was passed with a very narrow 5-4 vote in July 2020. Before the ruling, the entire state of Oklahoma was under the jurisdiction of the state government. Well, that's very natural. But after the ruling, the eastern half of Oklahoma became Indian country. In particular, you can see on this map, right? Those 5 Indian tribes now became they have the authority of jurisdiction over the eastern part. So this ruling was very significant just within days of its passage. You can see a lot of news coverage already talking about how the ruling will affect people or local residents, how it will affect firm operations and the government decisions. And that's why a lot of legal experts and the media consider this ruling as the most important Indian law decision in the past century. As you can see here, I quote Warner and Kanana. And we believe this ruling is important also for oil producers, which is our focus in this in this paper. Right after the ruling, you can see within days, right? A lot of media have already started talking about what's the potential impact of the McGirt ruling uh, on oil producers or in gas producers. They may face a lot of changes in future government policies. So there are several advantages of using the McGirt ruling, we believe, as our empirical setting. First of all, unlike other papers that typically relies on certain political events, such as elections, political elections at the federal level or at the state level, the timing of the McGirt ruling decision was completely unexpected because it was passed by a narrow 5-2 decision, and it all of a sudden overturned the whole jurisdiction in the eastern half of Oklahoma. So we believe this represents a clear exogenous shock to policy uncertainty in the eastern half, but not in the western half. Obviously, the entire state of Oklahoma was under the jurisdiction of Oklahoma state government prior to this jurisdiction shift. But after that, the western part remains the same. But the eastern half was now under the jurisdiction of 5 Indian tribes. And we believe that this causes a lot of uncertainty about future government policies in eastern Oklahoma, but not western Oklahoma. And also, I'll show you that such uncertainty is expected to persist for years to come. And also, I have also just shown you some media coverage and news articles about the potential impact of this ruling for oil and gas producers. So we also believe, the setting is relevant for our sample firms. Okay, before moving to our empirical design, I want to show you some anecdotal evidence. And this is our first validation of the setting. What we did was we searched the keywords on Google Trend, so we can see how how many people or local residents were curious about this McGirt ruling, probably because they feel uncertain about the future. As you can see, around the time of the ruling, July 2020, there's a surge in Google search for the keyword McGirt in Oklahoma. And this increase actually persisted for several years because they continue to feel uncertain about what the ruling, the McGirt ruling can bring about. And then another interesting thing is, within days of this ruling, the Oklahoma governor, Kevin Stitt, actually required that all state government agencies should assess or evaluate what are the potential impact of this McGirt ruling for them. And he also asked them to uh, come up with a plan to cope with such ruling change. So two steps, right? One is to assess what is the potential impact for each state government agency. Second is if they know what's the impact, they need to come up with a plan to cope with such changes. Interestingly, this is a response to the executive order issued by Governor Stitt. You can see this was issued by Oklahoma Corporation Commission, which is the main regulator for the oil and gas industry in Oklahoma. So prior to the ruling, they have the full authority of regulating all oil and gas producers. But after the ruling, they face some challenges. Here, actually, in the report, uh, in response to the executive order, they said, well, 3 months ago, McGirt ruling was passed, and the governor asked us to assess what's the potential impact. They highlighted that the fact is no one knows. Legal challenges based on McGirt have been and will presumably continue to be raised for many years because many of the government policies will take years to pass, right, and to become effective. So in that sense, a huge uncertainty exists in our area, in the oil and gas production area. Actually, this also helps us to address a concern about the setting because people may question, well, whether this is a first moment impact or second moment impact, meaning that if it's a first moment impact, you will see immediate government policy changes, and it's actually not the uncertainty affecting those firms. It's some policy changes affecting the firms. Here, we want to emphasize that it's actually the second impact because up until now we don't see any significant government changes. I'll show follow up by more anecdotal examples in this area. For example, this is from an excerpt from 10K document issued by an energy company called HF Sinclair. So this annual report was issued for fiscal year 2022, as you can see, which is the end of our sample period. And in that annual report, they mentioned McGirt ruling. They said a substantial uncertainty exists with respect to matters of which tribes may have exclusive or concurrent jurisdiction. At this time, we cannot predict how those issues, jurisdictional issues, will be ultimately resolved. So this tells us actually by the end of our sample period, there's a substantial level of policy uncertainty continuing to exist in Eastern Oklahoma, and there were no significant changes in government policies. So this sort of confirms this is not a first moment impact. This is affected by the second moment, which is the uncertainty perceived. Now, here I also want to highlight two key aspects of policy uncertainty arising from the McGirt ruling for firms located in Eastern Oklahoma. Yeah, because you may wonder, what kind of government policies will involve more uncertainty in our sample periods. As you can see on the left, one uncertainty is about potential tax changes. Typically there's surveillance tax on oil production or gas production in all over the country, right? And in the eastern part of Oklahoma, the surveillance tax was charged by the state government or the OCC, Oklahoma Corporation Commission, before the Mucker ruling. But right after the Mucker ruling, some of the tribes they attempted to raise a potential surveillance cost on oil producers, as you can see in the news articles, right? Seminole Nation, they attempt to raise some surveillance costs by sending letters to the oil producers. But right after the government says, okay, this has illegal issues. So the potential tax change has never been realized in Oklahoma. And that causes future uncertainties for oil producers in the eastern part of Oklahoma. And the second area that I want to highlight is uncertainty about environmental regulation. Well, before the ruling, the state has the jurisdiction on environmental monitoring and enforcement. But right after the ruling, the state government, they actually made a petition to the EPA, Environmental Protection Agency, requesting, still a full jurisdiction in the eastern half of Oklahoma, because they argue that, okay, there's a law, you can see 2005 law that includes a small clause that gives the state government authority in areas of the state. Actually, that clause was somehow quietly sneaked into the 2005 law. Then, of course, that faced a lot of resistance from those 5 Indian tribes, and eventually EPA actually withdrew this decision and reversed the decision to give Oklahoma state government control on environmental issues. So these are the two areas I want to highlight. Now, let's talk about the data and sample. Now, well, in this paper, we first compiled a comprehensive sample of oil-producing wells. So the main analysis is done at the oil-producing well level between the 6 years around the McGirt ruling from 2017 to 2022. McGirt ruling is right in the middle. And we obtained data from a commercial data platform called Everest Prism under NDA, non-disclosure agreement. And we can see that actually in the map below, right? This map plots geographical distribution of our sample wells. It's pretty, I would say they are spread across the entire state with in total, we have about 56,000 unique oil producing wells. About 44% of them are located in the eastern part, and the remaining is in the western part of the state. And besides that, we also obtained some data on air pollution emissions from EDGAR version 8. This is not the regular EDGAR data set we use. This is from a satellite data source. Yeah, I'll discuss about this more just a little bit later. Okay, now first let's take a look at the panel data we have. Now imagine we have a panel of individual oil producing wells and years, right? So 56,000 producing wells times 6 years. So we have about 256,000 well and year level observations. As you can see that in that sample, about 45% are located in the McGirt area, and we have a pretty balanced sample before and after the McGirt ruling, right? 3 years before, 3 years after. And the average value of well level production per year is about 3,000 barrels per year. And the production rate, meaning their production annual production divided by the number of production months in the year is about 271 barrels per month. Their average production time is about 9 months in a year. And we also coded, the percentage of new production wells. And below that, we come up with 4 different measures of air emissions from those wells. The first one is methane. Methane is always a big concern for oil and gas producers, as they cause a lot of health issues like respiratory diseases, premature death, or some heart diseases. And also, in terms of global warming possibility, their global warming potential is about 28 times of carbon dioxide, which is our second measure. So on average, each well emits about 17 tons of methane every year. That's a lot. I mean, you can imagine it's really the air is released to the atmosphere. And also it releases about 209 tons of carbon dioxide with some nitrous oxide, which also causes a lot of health issues. So in total, if we convert all those emissions to greenhouse gas, it's about 5,800 tons per year per well. So each well, if you convert all greenhouse emissions into this general measure, you will find on average they emit about 5,800 tons of those greenhouse gases per well. So that number is pretty alarming. And now let's move to the correlation matrix. If you remember, I said at the beginning of the paper or of my presentation that we assume that there's a positive correlation between firm production and environmental externalities. So first of all, we can validate whether there's a positive correlation between production and emission. As you can see, yes, there's a very significant positive correlation between these measures. And also we find that, okay, if you just focus on the first column, the oil wells located in the McGirt area or the eastern half of the state, they have more emissions overall, and they have lower oil production overall. But the univariate results do not tell us about the change, right, before and after McGirt ruling in these two parts. So here is our main analysis. Well, it's a typical diff in diff design, difference in difference design. And I think it's pretty easy to understand if you just look at this equation where we regress the firm year level oil production on an indicator of oil wells located in the eastern half of the state or the McGirt area times an indicator for the post period, and with controls and fixed effects, where we include a lot of well characteristics and also well fixed effects, year fixed effects. So by and large, these results tells you within well changes. We use those fixed effects to assume any time-specific or well-specific characteristics. Now, our focus is on the coefficient on the interaction term. And as you can see here, well, even without including the control variable, it's consistent with what we expect. Now, in column 2, the coefficient is about 9.8%, which tells us that for oil wells located in the McGirt area, their annual production increases about 10% in the post-McGirt period relative to oil wells located in the eastern half of the state, So it's a pretty large change because in terms of economic magnitude, it's about 303 barrels per year, right? We can use this 9.8 times average production per well. And next, we break down this interaction term into three interactions by decomposing this post indicator into 3-year dummies. So it tells us what's the yearly change in well level or prediction after the McGurk ruling. And as you can see that actually the effect increases by year. If you look, we look at column 4, where all the controls and fixed effects are included, you will find, okay, this the 2020 shows the smallest impact, while the other 2 years have an effect above 10%. Why is that case? Well, because remember, McGurk ruling was passed in July, at the beginning of July 2020. So it only affected half of the year in 2020. So that makes sense in terms of the economic magnitude. But still, we see a significant increase in 2020 and all subsequent years. The numbers are even larger in subsequent years. Okay, now another question about typical diff and diff design is there some pre-shock changes? So here we validate parallel trends by further breaking down, further including interactions for pre-McGurk years. As you can see, there is no pre-trend. So in this way, we also conduct a constant sample just to validate whether the results are driven by some sample composition changes. We validate this is not the case. Next, we break down or decompose total annual production into production rate and production time, right? Production rate can tell us how fast the producer produce or extract oil from their wells, and production time can tell us how long they work on the production. Here, the results is interesting because it tells us, okay, the increase in oil production is really driven by accelerated production rate, but not production time. In fact, the production time is a little bit shorter because probably they have already exhausted the oil reserves for some wells. And we will further check this in a later draft. So anyways, this table confirmed that our results on the increase in well level production is driven by faster production rate or depletion rate, but not longer production time. This is consistent with the notion that actually firms accelerate their oil production when facing higher policy uncertainty. Okay, and further, we did some parallel tests for production rate and time. The results are consistent. Now let's move to the second part of our paper, which focuses on well level emissions. Well, it's very hard to measure. I have to admit that it's very hard to measure well level emissions or pollution because for the following reasons. First of all, there's simply no regulation. If you check the Department of Environmental Quality's website, Oklahoma Department of Environmental Quality website, you will find there's no data, basically no data. And they do not mandate oil and gas producers to submit such data to them. And there's no monitoring in most of the Oklahoma cities. For oil producers, they're not even required to submit the data to the EPA in Oklahoma. So if you check EPA's enforcement record, I believe in our sample period, there were only two facilities reported some monitoring and enforcement activities. And since there's no reporting and no data, we need to come up with a way to solve this problem. How do we do that? Well, we find a satellite image data set, data provider. Actually, here we compile or extract air pollution emission data from high-resolution satellite imagery. So our basic approach is, just to give you some basic idea, we divide the whole map of Oklahoma into small grids, 0.1 degree by 0.1 degree, and then measure what's the air emission in each of the grid over the year. And this way we come up with 4 different measures as mentioned above. The first one is methane, carbon dioxide, nitrous oxide, and total greenhouse gas emissions. Here we plot 2 methane emission maps. It's kind of like a heat map, right? For 2019 and 2022, you can see that, well, there's a big change over these 2 years. Most of the change, I would say, overall, the total emission across the state has increased a lot, but the main increase appears in the eastern part, which is kind of consistent with our expectation that, policy uncertainty leads to more oil production and causing more air emissions. If we assume a positive correlation between oil production and emissions. Okay, here we use, again, a diff design by regressing air emissions on the McGirt indicator, the pulse indicator, and their interactions. Note that here we include, as before, we include well and year level fixed effects. So the main effects on those 2 indicators have already been absorbed. So we don't report them in the regressions. Our focus is again on the interaction coefficient. As here you can see, there's a big surge in methane emission right after McGirt for oil wells located in the eastern half of Oklahoma, right? A 27% increase in methane emissions, and also coupled with more than 40% increase in carbon dioxide emissions, more than 30% increase in nitrous oxide emissions. In total, it's more than 13%. Then we break down those results by further introducing those yearly interactions, and you can see actually the interaction in the first year is the smallest because we said McGirt ruling only affected the second half of 2020, as the law or the ruling was passed in July 2020, right? That makes sense. But more importantly, if you compare the coefficients here with the production or production coefficients, you will find the coefficients here have much larger magnitudes than the coefficients before. Why is that case? Well, that basically tells us, okay, there's incremental part in the emission, right? Probably they don't have enough equipment to fully absorb additional air emission, or probably they don't even want to do that. That means the firms may not be fully liable for their additional emissions. So in economic magnitudes are these results. The results in this table translates into 5 tons of additional methane emission, 130 tons of carbon dioxide, and so on. So these are pretty significant and alarming results, because if you multiply this incremental well level emission by the number of wells located in that area, it's about over 20,000 individual wells, right? The total number of emission will be, I don't know, skyrocketing so big. And here we further validate the parallel trends assumption for the emission tests. You can see the increase comes from the post period for McGirt area. Then we move to firm level tests. Why do we do that? Well, because in the first part, we only focus on well level production and emissions, but it is possible that there are other emissions coming from new drillings, like new spuddings, right? And also abandoned wells. So the pollution or air emission can arise from the entire life cycle of oil and gas producers, not just limiting to the production stage. They can arise from the exploration of oil. They can arise from the drilling activities. They can also arise from some abandoned wells or inactive wells. So here we aggregate all these wells at the firm level or the oil producer level instead of looking at individual oil producing wells. And here, basically, we come up with a firm level measure of McGirt. It's based on the percentage of wells the firm owned and located in the eastern half of the state, divided by total wells owned by the firm and located in the state. And if it's higher than the median, we think the firm is more exposed to the McGirt ruling and thus more exposed to increased policy uncertainty. And post indicator is the same as before. Here we also, also construct some measures of the number of active wells, inactive wells, and new spuds. Those are new drillings, new spuds. We also come up with measures for firm level emissions, as you can see here. Of course, I mean, the total production and total emission will be much larger here because now we're aggregating all the wells owned by the firm. Okay, so again, a different design, but it was estimated at the firm level, right? The firm level number of wells regressed on the interaction between McGirt and post. For example, if you just look at column 1, what does this interaction coefficient tell us? It tells us, well, for firms that are more exposed to the ruling, to the McGirt ruling, their total number of active wells increased by almost 2%. Well, there's also an increase in the number of active wells and new spuds. And you can see we have a breakdown of the increases. That means, well, these firms are investing in more new wells, and they also have more inactive wells. So this is consistent with our expectation that the McGirt ruling leads to more investment in new wells and faster depletion of existing wells. And here we examine how does firm level emission change over time. But it's hard to compare directly between these firms because a firm can have very different number of wells, right? So here we use a triple interaction to do a different design. And if you look at this design, we regress emission on the number of wells, could be active, inactive, or new wells. And also the interaction between the number of wells and McGirt interaction and the triple interaction, right? What does the first coefficient tell us? It tells us what's the per well emission for firms for control firms before the McGirt ruling. And beta 2 tells us what's the per well emission additional per well emission for McGirt firms. Beta 3 is our main variable of interest. It tells us what's the incremental emission for firms exposed to the McGirt ruling after in the post period after the ruling. So our focus is on the triple interaction. As you can see, per well emission of methane increases by 12%, very consistent with our previous findings at the well level, individual well level. And carbon dioxide also increases and so on. Then we break down the effects is pretty persistent, although the economic magnitudes are smaller in the first year for the reason I just discussed. Then, this is for emissions related to emissions from active wells. You can view them as oil producing wells. Then we also look at emissions from inactive wells, which should not be included in our previous sample. And you can see that per well emission doesn't change much in the post period for those affected firms. So it seems that, since those wells have already been abandoned, right, or they're inactive, there's no significant change in their emissions. And lastly, we also look at new investment or new spuds. You can see, okay, per well level emission increased a lot by 40%, 80%. And when we break down, it's a little bit lower. I'm not sure what causes the insignificant here. We probably need to explore a little bit more. Okay. So in the last of our paper, we focus on another set of tasks using county by year level sample. So here, the basic idea we want to explore is how does this incremental pollution or air emission affects local economy and local residents' health. Two things, right? One is if what we find is true, meaning that firms, oil producers located in eastern Oklahoma, they emit more in the post-McGirt area. We would expect that some impacts on local economy and also on local health conditions. Does that cause, in other words, does that increase the local welfare in terms of people's income? Does that impact their health conditions? So here you can see we have 77 county level measures, right? Times 6 years. And the sample again is very balanced across the eastern and western halves of Oklahoma, pre and post. We measure number of jobs, per capita income. We also measure their health conditions. I'll just explain in a bit. So first of all, we examined how does the McGirt ruling affect local jobs. We have three measures. One is the total number of jobs. The second one is total number of waged jobs. Then jobs in the oil and gas industry. We find that, well, in the post period, actually there's very minimal change in local
Dear Professor Ben,
job. Sorry, yeah,
yeah, question from David.
okay.
You can, yeah, you can
Oh,
ask.
Hi.
the price, yeah.
No, I had the same question that I think Irene also asked. Because in 2020, by July, the price of petroleum had already gone up, WTI, West Texas Intermediate. So did you control for it? I think that's the same question that Irene asked. So
Okay. So I'll give you a more, so the simplest answer is we use definitive design. Assuming that price impact is homogeneous for all oil producing wells in the state, right? Which is likely the case because when I was in Oklahoma, there's a city called Cushion, which has the national reserve for crude oil for the US. And assuming the oil price is time specific only, this should not have differential impact on the eastern and western half of the state. So it's unlikely to be the case. What we're looking at is diff and diff. The first difference is the difference between affected firms or treatment firms and control firms. Then we compare pre and post, right? So diff and diff. I think our research design coupled with well and time fixed effects helps address this potential concern. Okay.
thanks, Ben.
Any other questions?
Yes. Arina, you have questions?
Yeah,
Arina
hey,
Herman?
yeah, one question. So, oh, can you hear me?
Hey, it's
Yeah.
Joe.
Hey, yes. So, yeah, I find that the different diff design very compelling, and then the heat picture like completely convinces me about the increased activity. But my question is about the uncertainty, right? We're talking about. So, what do you think is the uncertainty about? Is this more about the regulation on pollution, or is this the uncertainty maybe more on the ownership, or like systems to be trying to get as much as possible from the wells, just trying to finish the job, that kind of feeling. So, like, can you shed light a little bit on that? And over time, is there a little bit of change in the degree of uncertainty as time passes?
Well, that's a great question. Probably I didn't elaborate on this issue enough at the beginning of my presentation. So here, as also highlighted in our paper, we think there are two aspects of this particular uncertainty that's worth our attention, that's noticeable, right? One is about tax, potential tax. Well, now all of a sudden, those 5 Indian tribes, they have jurisdiction on oil and gas production tax, severance tax, right? Severance tax is something that would be charged on how much oil you produce every year or every quarter. It's like sales tax here, okay? And in fact, some Indian tribes has already initiated some efforts, try to get a sense how much they can get from this process. But of course, that faced a lot of resistance from oil producers and from the state government. So one aspect is about potential taxation. And when firms, they feel such pressure, they will worry about, losing economic benefits in the future, right? If we continue our production, then in the future, we may face double taxation from both the state government and the tribe. So why don't we accelerate the the production before future upcoming tax changes? That's the idea. Why is about environmental policy uncertainty? For example, the firms can be uncertain about how much environmental monitoring and enforcement those tribes want to impose on them. Now, at least they have some kind of uncertainty. It's still under the jurisdiction of state environmental department, right? Yeah, there's a continuance in the policy. And so they can, they can continue emitting air pollutions or whatever. But in the future, if the tribes, the Indian country, they want to control more, that causes further instability or insecurity about economic losses. So that also will make them want to accelerate production, which inadvertently leads to more pollution. That's the basic argument.
Bin, sorry, quick point on the previous question. I agree with your explanation. I think what you probably could show in addition to the explanation, and I don't believe there should be any issue there, but just to show that there is no quality difference in the oil extracted because it's the same state. I wouldn't believe that one has very low quality crude, like sour crude as they call it, and the other one has very light and sweet crude. I wouldn't imagine that would be an issue, but I guess adding a line that the quality is the same will probably bolster the argument of price change would not impact because price is quite different for different grades of oil. So
okay, that's a good suggestion. We can definitely do that. Yeah.
Chris?
Thank you. Thank you, Mohammed. Hi, Bin. Good to see you
Chris.
again.
How are you doing? Yeah.
Very well. Great paper. As I said in my comment, I was just wondering whether this is an overreaction or actually whether since the ruling, we've seen any regulatory changes in taxation or other areas to justify this sort of behavior. Because this is striking. What you've done with the data is really absolutely amazing. But yeah, is this an overreaction, put simply?
Well, we won't be able to answer this until several years later, I guess. So far, as I've shown at the beginning of my presentation, whether this is a first moment or second moment effect, right? It seems that at least by the end of our sample period, which is 2022, there were not significant, we do not observe any significant changes in the taxation or environmental regulation. And so it's more likely driven by the second moment rather than the first moment. And of course, your point is well taken because if there's any significant policy changes that we ignored in the paper, right, this may cause some changes that may explain the patterns we observe.
As you said, some of these things may take years to become.
Yeah,
Anyway.
I mean, as one of the energy company highlighted in their annual report, right? They say that, well, there's huge uncertainty for us too. At this moment, we do not know what will happen in the future. Okay,
Maybe
should I
just
move
a
on?
little bit of
Oh,
clarification on my question about the price of petroleum. You know, 2020 was COVID year, and so I thought the price of petroleum was going down during that time. But I think I heard that the price of oil was going up. And of course, if the price of oil is going up, then companies naturally just pump more oil. So what can you clarify a little bit the role of the price of petroleum? I assume that was one of your control variables.
Yeah, so it's a good point. So we control this by the time fixed effects, right? In our different diff design, we basically look at within time and within well effects, right? At any time point, we're comparing oil wells located in the eastern half of the state versus those located in the western half of the state. By controlling that time fixed effect, we're actually controlling for the price that is common for both types of wells. We're looking at the differential part.
Thanks.
Yeah, sure.
There's no control on, there's no legislation that requires oil companies to control their emissions. Is that correct in Oklahoma?
Well, there are several things, right? I didn't have time to expand on this, but first of all, when they apply for drilling and emission, they only require estimates, not actual numbers. Second, after that, you will find a lot of loopholes in the laws. I discussed this more thoroughly in my paper, and they can somehow avoid the reporting. Third, there was no requirement or laws on methane emission even at the national level until the end of last year, 2023.
Mhm.
So before that, methane disclosure was not required even by the EPA.
Okay,
And
thanks.
also
Yeah.
we validated enforcement and monitoring activities in Oklahoma. We find only very few firms had that in the past 5 years. So that gives us some confidence that, okay, the monitoring was not there. So when firms weigh economic benefits and their environmental performance, they may probably lean toward economic benefits for the reasons I just said.
Yeah, very interesting paper.
Okay.
Thanks for presenting it.
Okay, I haven't finished yet, but let me quickly finish the rest of the results and conclude. Well, here, if you look at the total job changes, you don't find much for the total job changes, but there's significant change in the oil and gas sector, which makes a lot of sense to me. It increases with the production and investment. In terms of income, personal income, per capita income increases by about 2 to 5%. It's very minimal change, which basically suggests that while those firms have accelerated their production, local residents didn't benefit that much, right? They didn't have increased their income by as much. And in the last test, we actually examined how this ruling may affect local health issues. Because prior research, including, I think Christian Lewis has a paper on this, they find that the pollution from oil production, oil and gas production can affect early deaths, can affect respiratory diseases, can affect heart diseases. And we do find some evidence suggesting that, okay, there are more premature deaths from respiratory diseases and deaths from heart attacks. So overall, the last part of our analysis gives us a sense that, okay, the local residents didn't benefit much from the incremental part of oil production, meaning that their income didn't increase much. Not a lot more jobs were created except for the oil producing sector. But local residents bears the environmental cost, right? Because we know environmental issues to a large extent is a local issue. And so that has impacts on both on local welfare, I would say. Okay, So in conclusion, what are the main takeaways from the paper? I think our paper highlights a very important trade-off between economic benefits and environmental externalities of firms, particularly when they face a lot of policy uncertainty. Could be due to any issues, elections, but we choose to use the setting of McGirr ruling, which is considered as the most important Indian law ruling in the past 100 years. Our findings are consistent with Harding's notion of the tragedy of commons, which basically says, okay, if the society has to bear the cost, when firms face instability or insecurity about their future economic benefits, they will accelerate their production or extraction of natural resources. And our findings are also consistent with the famous Coase concept of the problem of social cost, because assuming firms are not fully liable for what they do to the environment, they may lean toward their economic benefits rather than environmental performance. So overall, our paper, I think, underscores the importance of environmental regulation and enforcement, especially during the periods of high policy uncertainty. Okay, that's all I have. So thank you so much. We can chat more out, offline if you have more questions.
Thank you very much, dear Professor Billy, for your contribution and your effort. It's a great contributions and excellent paper. Thank you very much. Now, if anyone have any questions, you can open your mic and ask your question. Yes, Dr. Mahmoud Marzoui.
Yes, thank you very much for very interesting paper. Sorry, I joined late. I joined when you.
I cannot see the audience anyways during my presentation.
Yeah. So I just noticed that the interaction in Model 3 in Table 5 was quite high at 10% significant level. I think the magnitude of the coefficient was 0.425, which was larger compared to the Model 1 and Model 2.
Okay.
Does this suggest?
Let me show this again and let's see which table. Table 5 is the summary statistics. Which table?
Five down. After that, I think it's
6.
No, not this one. No.
Which result?
Maybe the test 5, or you go down.
Oh, 5. Local economy?
Yes, here. This is
okay.
Yeah. So the coefficient in Model 3 is quite high comparing to Model 1 and 2. And similarly in the other, when you did the interaction as well, the coefficient in Model 6 is much higher than Model 4 and 5. Does this impose
because the dependent variables here are different. The first one is total employment. The second one is waged jobs. The third one is the employment in the oil and gas sector, ONG. So this is expected, right? As those firms accelerate their production and investments, they need more people to work on those projects.
Specific type of local employment in each one.
Yeah. We look at a specific type of local employment in the oil and gas sector. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much. But idea is very interesting. All best of luck with it.
Oh, thank you so much.
Yeah. Masoud?
Hello, everyone. Thank you for the presentation. If you like, this is the Oklahoma cases. I learned something because I didn't know anything about this. And while you were talking, I went on a different screen. I just tried to educate myself a little bit, but thanks a lot for that. So this, when I was following the presentation, for me, this is like a unique sort of case with its specifics. But I was interested in the very title of the presentation, if you like, how firms react to policy uncertainty, and you mentioned the environmental issues. I wanted to ask you about your views on corporations, and there's a lot of evidence about that, exporting environmental problems to other countries when they are faced with regulations. This is if like their tactic to bypass tighter regulations. So, we can just make up a case of like regulations about manufacturing any product, and you have CO2, whatever, that don't fit with the new regulations. So they just shift the manufacturing to a third world country. So the Oklahoma case I think, is too specific because the wells are where they are. Either you drill or you don't drill. If like you don't really have much choice. And then whether the tribes will take over and impose more taxes and things. So it's too specific. So what about the rest of the manufacturing sector? Let's forget about the oil. I wanted to hear your views on that. Yeah.
Well, that's a valid point. I'm also aware of the literature, actually. It's about outsourcing of pollution, right? When firms face more local enforcement, environmental enforcement or monitoring, they tend to outsource some of the high pollution areas to other countries so that they can somehow take a shortcut and circumvent the local regulation. Well, so whether our results can be interpreted in a broader context, I think it is possible because not everything in the firm can be exported. For example, right? High-tech industries, you would think that firms can export a lot of stuff like Apple or Google. They can export some of the design, some of the coding part to India and other countries. But still, they have a huge local presence, right? They have data centers in the US. They have local manufacturing. If you consider Microsoft, they produce laptops in the US. They produce chips in the US. Especially, I mean, in this time, right? A lot of manufacturing will probably, restart in the US. So I would imagine, given the importance of manufacturing in this country, if you look at the percentage of manufacturing in terms of total GDP, I mean, still there's significant manufacturing and production in the US.
Thank you.
Are there another question? I think Shahid Khan.
Yes, hi there. Sorry, my camera is not on. So my question is, why you only included the oil and gas industry? Because you were talking about taxes and some policy changes. Why not in other industries, which could be related to ESG type issue? Or is that the only industry?
Okay, so just to give you one idea, right? So about 10 to 15% of the US GDP relates to oil and gas. And that number is much higher in Oklahoma. About, I think, more than 30% of the GDP comes from the oil and gas sector in Oklahoma. If you have ever been to the States, you will notice that actually there's not much more other than oil and gas. And that's the most significant industry, I would say, in the whole state of Oklahoma. It's a pillar of the Oklahoma economy. I mean, other than that, you don't see much.
Right. Well, like what I was thinking was from a research design point of view, if tax sort of extraction or that sort of a rent idea, if that's the cause of more extraction, could there be other industries that may, or somehow you can show that this effect is in some ways in other, or it's only in oil and gas?
Well, as I said, I mean, given the significance of the oil and gas industry in Oklahoma's economy, it's not surprising that media or news articles they immediately reacted to the passage of the McGirt ruling or McGirtization within days, right? And you can see the most frequent title they use is "What's the implication of McGirt ruling for oil production in our state?" because that's where the most people got employed. I would say about 30% of the employment in Oklahoma is supported by the oil and gas industry. Other than that, you only have some small local business.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sure. No, that's a great, everything is great about the paper. My only thing is the policy changes that are gonna have that effect, the independent variable. My mind was always was questioning that, what exactly is that variable? And you have done a good job in explaining could be taxes, could be things that more information to that piece, I think will comfort what I was thinking. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. I just a small point I want to add. In that employment table test, right, we find there's not much increase in other sectors in the whole economy, but there's a big increase in the oil and gas sector, which tells you, okay, the change actually happens in the oil and gas, but not other sectors.
Great. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there another question? Thank
Yeah,
you very
just
much.
curious,
Yeah.
were you able to filter out if any of that additional employment actually went to the indigenous communities? Because I do know that some oil and gas companies, when they're drilling on indigenous land, that they do try to employ more native people to help out with that increase so that they do have some benefits. You might not have been able to filter that out or determine that.
Yeah, to my knowledge, it's very hard to find the data. I mean, they don't report that publicly. What we rely on is the BEA data, Bureau of Economics Analysis data. They don't report separately for indigenous versus indigenous.
Okay.
But it would be nice if we have that data.
Yeah, it would be.
Thank you very much, dear Professor Benley, for your contribution and your effort. It's really excellent presentation, excellent paper. Thank you very much, everyone join us today, and thank you very much, dear Professor Benley, for taking the time to present to us today. It's been really appreciated. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you so much again for your invitation, and hope all is well.
Yeah, and I hope to see you soon in Egypt. You are very welcome.
Okay, have a nice weekend. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.